Welcome to Curious Coaching, the Sport Northern Ireland podcast for coaches who are driven to explore new ways, thirsty for new ideas, and passionately curious about how they can maximise the power of sport through great coaching. The podcast that seeks not to answer coaching questions, but to provoke them.
Hello and welcome to the Curious Coaching podcast with Michael Cook and Simon Toole. Today is the second in our series around coach wellbeing. I'm really pleased to welcome Mick McKinnon. Mick will give you a chance in a second to tell us a little bit about you and your role in coaching. But really pleased to have you here. And yeah, give us a little bit of a background into yourself.
Well, I'm currently working for Hockey Ireland. Been in role for about 8 weeks. I filled a number of roles within the organisation, but now I'm full-time with them as a pathway manager. So basically it's to take a zoomed-out view of the pathway from when a kid potentially steps on the pitch provincially for the first time all the way through to the national team. Basically it's to try and create alignment within that pathway and alignment within the coaching pathway that will run alongside it with a view to producing potential Olympians for 28 and 32. So,
and Mick, you've done a bit of, a lot of coaching in the past too. So tell us a wee bit about your background in coaching, even outside of that role.
Well, I sort of stumbled into coaching. I got injured early when I was a player. I was sort of the first generation of player that went on to AstroTurf before everyone knew the dangers of being on AstroTurf. So by circumstance, I quit playing early. Stumbled into coaching, had no game plan, just the club that I used to play for wanted me to coach some kids, discovered a passion for it, but never really saw it as a career choice. And then through circumstance ended up moving to Northern Ireland and working for a club funded partly by Sport NI and the local council. And again, no real game plan. It was never seen as a career choice, but had some success early on and went through the Irish pathway, married it with trying to juggle a career, and basically ended up working with the national teams, worked for a short period with the men's national team and then as an assistant coach for the women's team in the build-up to and including the Tokyo Olympics. So.
Brilliant. I know I have some prior experience of you as well through the coach education stuff that you're involved in, and definitely taken a lot from you and your coaching and your ideas and things as well. So really pleased to be able to follow that up today.
Yeah, we're absolutely delighted to have you here, Mick. And I like that term you used, married. So you're married to the sport. And I know someone like yourself who's massively involved in hockey down the years is a huge commitment to the sport. So it's great to see you back in it. The theme today, in terms of this episode, but also the wider series, is around wellbeing and coach wellbeing in particular. So I guess my question to you is, what does wellbeing mean to you?
Most of us go into sport as a chosen leisure activity. It's something that we enjoy, and I've been through stages in my journey with hockey where I certainly haven't enjoyed it, and it's affected my I was going to say my other life, but they're impossible to separate. Simon will know I'm a bit of a grouch, and I hate some of the modernisation of coach education. I hate acronyms specifically because I come from an educational background. No one ever remembers what an acronym stands for, but I went on a course and one of the things was it was an acronym for coach, and the first C was constant. Okay, and that's something that I think when it comes to well-being, the ability to separate your coaching experiences from your normal family life are really important, and if one infects the other, then you've a potential problem. So for me, it was when coaching was taking over the other parts of my life then there was a well-being issue there.
Absolutely, and some of the discussions we've had in other episodes have definitely lent itself towards that type of thinking and some of the issues that can arise. So if you had to describe to someone who doesn't necessarily know the coaching environment, and you had to tell them why coach wellbeing is important, how would you describe that?
So basically, I come from a sport where it's not highly funded. So when you first start and you can't turn down any work, you work every hour God sends. They're quite often unsociable hours. And what you then need to be able to do is to compartmentalize that part of your life. And when you can't, I'm not sure I'm really answering your question. I think I'm sort of repeating myself on the first answer. But when you can't, it becomes an issue, and basically well-being is, that the other side of your life, the non-coaching side, isn't affected by what's going on in coaching. So, as an example, I used to coach in Armagh, and I lived 2 miles from the pitch. And if it was a good day, it was a good evening. And if it was a bad day at coaching, it was a bad evening. And when I moved to a club in Dublin, I found a bit more balance in that I had an hour and a half drive home after the game. By the time I got home, whatever had happened in the game was out of my system, and I was able to really switch off. But it's that having that ability to, I don't think you ever switch off, right? I certainly don't. But it's having the ability to switch off the part of your mind that's affected emotionally by the sport. Right? You never switch off. I can be watching the Great British Bake Off. I can see something, it might give me an idea for coaching. Right? Okay, so that part of my brain's always on, but it's the emotional side. It's the realization that ultimately, even if it is your profession, it is only a game. It is only a sport,
Yeah, it's not always easy to see it in that perspective.
Yeah.
One of the previous episodes that we had this concept that coach burnout is a perfectly natural response to the environment in which coaches operate. You've touched a little bit on that. How does that statement stand to you?
I don't think it should be something that we accept. It depends how you define it, in that if you're coaching in a certain environment, you probably don't want to leave anything in the tank, if that's what we're describing as burnout. But if we raise awareness of it, it will allow people to recognise it and to devise strategies to deal with it. Okay, so I know that the worst episode I had when I was coaching came because I was just unaware that it was coming up on me, and it hit me like a bus. And then in the future, when I was reaching that stage where I was probably running on empty, because I recognised some of the signs of what had come before, I'd developed some strategies to deal with that in the future. Now, what I would have preferred was that there was someone maybe on a podcast telling me that this was an issue, and basically highlighting some of the signs, so I didn't have to go through what I went through the first time I went through it. So coaches reaching empty is inevitable. Burnout to me is probably when something burns out, it can't be refilled or relit. It's difficult, or it's a long process of healing. So I'd say that it's a bit defeatist if we say it's inevitable. I think it's avoidable with education and with support.
And interesting to hear, when you came back the second time around, you had developed those strategies. Would you see it quite often that some coaches don't come back around?
Absolutely. I'll be quite open. I'd reached a stage where I couldn't sleep, where I would I'd be in tears. I was due to go to a tournament and was taken into hospital about 2 weeks before, had blood tests, and literally can remember thinking, I hope I've got cancer. The most ridiculous thought. I'm not being flippant about cancer or anyone who's been through that. It just showed how messed up my mind was by the burnout that we'd been in. And then went to the tournament, and it was the most difficult experience of my life, really. And I was lucky that one of the other coaches on the team was very understanding and supportive of me. But it scared me, that experience, because of how illogical that thought is. And I always worry about telling that story in case that it offends anyone who's been through cancer in their family. I don't mean to do that at all. It's just shows how ridiculous my thought process was at that time. Subsequently, I took a step back and got back to enjoying coaching again, and then I got back involved in performance sport, and I was able to recognise some of the signs that were there and to make interventions in the future. So,
well, just before I pass over to Simon here, firstly, thank you for telling that story, because I guess we don't know who's out there listening and might need to hear that might be in the same space.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. I think that's one of the reasons we were really keen to speak to you on the podcast, because we've had this conversation before, and I remember standing at the side of a pitch. It was a InterVarsities game. I'd gone to watch the team, and I was at the lowest point, which wasn't just as low as you described there, but I was at the lowest point I've ever been at in coaching, and starting chatting to you and explaining to you, and you were able to go straight away. Was it the best thing for the team or not? But it was the best thing for you as an individual, Simon. What are the challenges that you would have seen that would have built up you to the point, and obviously there's some things you will want to go into and some things not, but like, what do we see in coaches that can help build up those well-being challenges to get to that point where actually something that is inherently enjoyable under normal circumstances actually becomes something that we really don't want to be involved in?
I think it comes down to how much. Well, there's two things. One, if you work in a sport like mine in hockey, there's no big salaries, so you're basically etching out a living. You're doing a bit here, a bit there, and so obviously, if you've a mortgage, if you've a family, then there's very few salaries in our sport. So you're working hand to mouth. So there's the stresses of earning a living, which is one, and which takes away the fun from it, because initially when we all start, it's our hobby. Then the second thing is you feel that in order to get ahead, that almost every sport from the outside, people look at results. So you put a lot more emphasis on result, and it means a lot to you, the result of a game. And so you build it up to be a lot more important in your head than it probably is. And then you find you're awake at 3 a.m, strategizing or stressing over a conversation you had the day before, and it just sort of snowballs. And then, the tighter you get, it just becomes a snowball effect, really. And that's what happens. You just build it up to be something more important than it is.
Because I think from me and my experience there was, I was going from probably coaching on a voluntary basis mostly to all of a sudden receiving not a lot of money but some money, and for me that placed that nearly increased my expectations of myself, but also you may have the expectations on how realistic or not they are in the wider organisation around the team that you're coaching. So how much do you think is coming from the individual, and how much of it is coming from the organisation or the things around them as a coach?
I can only speak from my own experience and say that and all of the pressure was internal. It wasn't external. I couldn't speak more highly of the people that I worked for. As an example, after the first incident I'd had, I reached a stage of sort of burnout when I was working with the Club Railway Union in Dublin. And I could feel it coming, and we'd been very successful and we'd won the national championship. And the following year we're going to Europe. First time the club had ever done it. And I just was gone by Christmas. I had nothing left. And I said to the club I was quitting. And the club said, don't quit, just take time. Middle of the season, just take time and put a package in place that meant that I could just clean my head. And I came back like 3-4 weeks later and stayed for another 3 years. So, I think that I was quite lucky in that I worked in some organisations that understood the pressures and were very supportive of that. I can't speak for any other organisations.
But what made it a situation? I guess for lots of people, it's like nearly I don't know if like the stigma in some cases of having that conversation between whoever it was in the club and yourself, or maybe sometimes it's actually from the club end where you're going, actually, it's a bit, I don't really want to talk to this. I want to talk about the tactics of the game and the techniques of the game. I don't want to get into these types of conversations. So what was it about that environment that made that conversation happen?
I think it's just relationships that have been established. So I was coaching the club and working in the school, and one of the key players on the team was coaching in the school. And she said to me she'd seen me go downhill. And she was the first one I spoke to, and I went to her and I said, look, I want to speak to you. And she said, I know what you're going to say. Okay, so it was I'd been with the club already for 3.5 years, so they knew who I was. There were pre-established relationships. Also, like, hockey coaching's a bit of a, like, seller's market. There aren't many out there, so it's not like they could ship me out and ship someone else in the next day. So I suppose in that environment, I was quite lucky. But I think it's just people having an understanding of, like I was working full time, coaching them, weekends, living a long way away. I think they were just understanding, but it did help that one of the players was working with me and had just seen me go downhill, like, pretty rapidly. So,
and if you were working, obviously that day we had that conversation. It was, I think it was probably just an open conversation, and you having some experience of something similar in the past, and that for me was, it made for me my mind up probably in what I needed to do, or I probably thought I knew what I needed to do, but just hadn't quite got the clarity in my mind. But for other coaches, if those of us who are working alongside coaches or around coaches, is there anything you think we should be on the lookout for people who are getting to a fairly challenged state?
It's difficult because in coaching you probably you create a persona, and there's a lot of acting involved, so, like, I know that when I was feeling quite bad, the players wouldn't really know. It was just that this person I worked with in an external environment was able to spot it. You're able to walk in. So I just think that conversations, like, away from the sport, how you're feeling, what's, establishing the trust where that they can open up to you, but it is difficult because, like you say, it sometimes it can be a hidden thing. Coaches will want to hide it, or they won't want to speak to other people, or they'll put on a brave face, and then it becomes too late, and, like, it sort of hits you. And I know the first time I had that, it's sort of like, it was so obvious what was coming, but I didn't see it. Like, I had another episode a few years later, and then my wife said, just go and see a doctor and chat to the doctor. And literally the doctor said, well, what's your week look like? And I started to list it out. And by the end I was laughing, and he was laughing because it was so flipping ridiculous what I was doing. Right. Okay. And I left and I wasn't even in my car when I'd resigned from a job. I'd walked out and just rang them and said, I can't do this anymore. And that was circumstantial in that I went into a club as an assistant coach, and then the head coach left, and I ended up naturally taking over, but I shouldn't have taken over. But, you know, it's just getting people to speak. And I think what you guys are doing by raising awareness of this is really important, because you tend to think that it's just you, whereas in fact, like Michael says, it's probably pretty commonplace. So.
No, definitely. Thanks for sharing that, Mick. I know even away from coaching, I've definitely had some challenges, like wellbeing challenges nearly on the mental side of things, and definitely would be encouraging people to, you know, if it's not somebody around you, or maybe if it is somebody around you you've had an initial chat with, just you know, I've ended up with some qualified help and support around that, and I did that exact process of listing before I went, sitting and listing out all the challenges that I had, and it sounds like a very, very similar list getting in length, if not in content in the end of it, but it gives you a starting point and gives you something to start from and move from. But definitely for me, that access to somebody who really knew what they were talking about around those areas too was a really good point to start and try and build up from there.
Let me throw another statement at you, Mick. I'm interested to get your thoughts on this one. Coaches with positive well-being is a competitive advantage for a team or an athlete. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I probably agree with that. It's, I mean, again, I can just speak from personal experience, but I feel I've done my best coaching when I felt like it's been my hobby. Even if you're getting paid for it, it's like, this is my hobby. You know, I enjoy what I'm doing. Okay. And when you're in a sort of, in that positive mindset, you tend to be a bit more aggressive with decision making. You tend to be in a sort of mindset where you're like, that positivity is like, it exudes. You know, I think that emotion is infectious, and that as a coach you have to display positivity if that's the mood you want from your team. So yeah, I mean, I would say there's very few things in life where you wouldn't do it better if you're in a good place and your well-being was looked after. So
yeah, absolutely. So just on that then, what do you feel we can do as a sporting community to try and encourage or foster more coach well-being?
Raising awareness is really important. Having people that will listen and not judge to people is important. So you know, if coaches are feeling like this, who can they speak to? It could be someone within their own club, a developer they know, you know, but having strategies in place for anyone who feels like this. And yeah, so I mean, I'd say it's the same. It's just breaking down like taboos and barriers about, you know, when you coach, you want to display a strong image, okay? But I think there's strength in confronting things and being open and honest about things, and showing a human side. So it's just a case of more people just saying, look, this is an issue, okay? But raising awareness of the issue and setting up strategies for when it's flagged up are the way forward, you know?
Absolutely. And I really like that concept that vulnerability, if you like, is actually a strength. So showing that you're vulnerable actually in the long run allows you to be stronger, because you're dealing with the bits that need dealt with at that time. On that, where do you think coach wellbeing sits currently with people who deploy coaches? So clubs, governing bodies, basically anywhere a coach is deployed. Do you think it's on the radar? Is it high enough on the radar, or are we still missing this piece?
Yeah, I don't think it's a strength. Certainly, it's something that we need to address in the organisation I'm working in. A lot of the coaching will be volunteer based, so it's sort of, I want to say underpaid, but it's not paid, and it's certainly underappreciated. And that appreciation can come materially through, thanks, here's this, or it can come through support, either in development as a coach or emotional support, or someone just to listen to. There are a trail of coaches, I would imagine, in every sport that are burnt up as volunteers, and then we move on to the next one, as opposed to, I would hope that in the organisation I work, that if a coach stops coaching within the organisation, they'll look back with fond memories, as opposed to feeling that they were a bit used, and that has to become part of, working alongside the coach, in support. If it can't be financial, it can be in development, or it can be in simply just being there as a sounding board. So,
and I would massively agree with you. I think we're not very far down the road with this in terms of, from an organisational point of view, we need to take better care of our coaches, and we need to find ways, as you say, sometimes financially, sometimes non-financially, that support element, finding ways that actually contribute to better well-being and less burnout. Mm-hmm. Throwing that back over to the coaches themselves, you talked about strategies and aspects that you had which helped. What can coaches do to try and mitigate against burnout?
I think there's a number of strategies that you can use. I mean, I was speaking with you guys earlier about just switching your phone off and compartmentalising parts of your life. Have some hobbies. Find something where that when you're doing it, you're not thinking about coaching. It was really powerful for me having kids, and having a part of my life where it's obviously more important than sport, and just giving me. I'm a bit of an evangelist for parenthood. I'm not, it's not for everyone, and some people obviously. But for me, it's just been a godsend, because it's allowed me to see what's really important, and to turn away. So basically, compartmentalisation is really important. Just put the sport in a box. Know that these are the times I'm going to think about that, and these are the times I'm not. And you won't manage it all the time, but it's certainly healthy. Another one is I went to a stage where my behaviour was abhorrent towards officials in the game, to the point where I was just embarrassing myself. So a strategy someone suggested to me, and it worked for a while, was I just wrote myself a letter about who I wanted to be. And if I ever was straying too far from who I wanted to be, it was a reminder, and I'd keep it in my back pocket when I coached. So just things like that, just little strategies that allow you to remind yourself of who you want to be, and compartmentalise when you're going to be that person.
Love it. That's actually some really good strategies that I haven't necessarily heard before. So I'm thinking what I would put in that letter now, based on what you said there.
Grant, Mick, funny you mentioned about the conversation we had earlier on. Even I'm thinking in your role now and leading a pathway about, I guess, how we set up the coaching that people are doing or create the coaching roles. And you've talked even a little bit about that even before now. You've talked about actually if we're just asking a little bit less of people too. Do you see that a role for that and an impact potentially in how people are able to maintain a positive wellbeing outlook, just based on actually it's a much more manageable amount of stuff that we're asking for?
Yeah, I think that systematically we can do that in that we tend to put coaching under one umbrella. So basically, you're the coach, so you're responsible for everything, okay? As opposed to utilising people's specific skill sets and sort of delegating work to other people, or just saying, listen, I need a trainer. I need somebody to deliver a pitch session, as opposed to I need a coach, which is the establishment of relationships and the zoomed out view. So my experience in my sport is that we see it as the coaches everything, as opposed to one thing, and we therefore then say, well, I need a coach for this group. And the commitment's massive, as opposed to saying, well, actually, I need a coach for this group. But if I got 4 trainers in and they did a bit less work, but they're delivering something themed by the coach, then all of a sudden there's a lot more division of labour. There's a lot less. People can streamline their thoughts to a specific need as opposed to the big picture. So systematically, there's definitely changes that could be made.
Thanks, Mick. And I think probably the last one for me probably is thinking you talked a little bit, quite a lot about compartmentalising coaching and where it fits within your life. How do we square with that with this? I don't know if it's a culture or an expectation or what it is in performance sport, where it's your life. It's and you can't do the job well if you don't do it 80 hours a week. How do we balance those two things out?
See, I don't. So I would. It's good because it'd be the first time we disagree in the podcast. But I don't think it's your life, okay? And it's our job to show people evidence that, in fact, that they will do their job better if they do it smarter. Okay, it's not about volume; it's about quality of what you do, and that a burnt out coach is no good to anyone. So I'd rather have a coach who did less better than did more, and was on the road to burnout. And that's an education piece for us to do. Okay, and to create scenarios where, yes, it's important, yes, it's your job, but that's all it is. Okay, and it can be quite difficult because these jobs are few and far between. So when you've got one, you want to keep it. You want to keep it, obviously, but it's the same as I would say with, like, we should always look for the why in things. And these coaches, they're probably working these hours because they think that that's effective, but demonstrating ways of working smarter would be, in my opinion, produce better coaches and better results. So,
yeah, no, we're definitely not going to disagree about that. I think it's just that's the prevailing message sometimes you get in performance sport, rather than us certainly saying that that's the way it is. But that's the balance. But totally get what you're chatting about, and certainly would agree with much of it there around actually how to be productive. I'm definitely even seeing that outside of performance sport and other roles of going, actually, I'm just slogging away at an office job here and I'm not achieving anything, where actually if it just took half an hour, if it took an hour here, or if it just stopped for today and came back to it tomorrow, I'd make much more use of the time that I'm putting into it.
Yeah.
Mick, we've asked you loads of questions today. Is there any question that we haven't asked you on this theme that you think actually this is worth bringing up?
Not really. I think you've hit everything on the head. I mean, like I think that there is an opportunity within coach education to touch upon some of these things. So, like, I was sort of self-taught as a coach, sort of stumbled from failure to failure. And if you have the skill of self-reflection, you potentially get better. But a lot of our coach education is curriculum-based, and it's based around this is what you deliver and this is how you deliver it, and not actually about what being a coach is like and ways that you manage that. And I think that there's scope within organisations to touch upon those sorts of things there. But ultimately, raising awareness of what can happen to coaches is vital, and I think that this is a good first step towards that. So,
absolutely. Well, Mick, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to get your insights into this concept of coach wellbeing, and we really appreciate you sharing your story. For all the listeners, I hope this is resonating with you guys, and maybe coaches that you work with, maybe yourself as a coach. But we'll continue to try and bring you content on this theme, and we just want to thank you for tuning in and being part of the Curious Coaching Podcast.
Curious Coaching is brought to you by Sport Northern Ireland. We hope that this episode has sparked some curiosity for you and your coaching. The future belongs to the curious.